Good morning, Allentown Victory Church. Question for you. Is there something that maybe Captain Obvious could point out in front of you right now? Well, we're going to talk about some obvious things here in just a moment.
So I pay $5 for a 2-hour movie and then realize that my flight is only 90 minutes long. I mean, come on!
So tired. I think I slept too much.
Honey, the fridge is full.
Babe, my coffee mug is too tall for the Keurig.
What am I supposed to do with my leftover chicken fajitas?
I'm hungry, but I'm not like hungry.
I'm not hungry. Not hungry. Not hungry. I don't even know if I'm hungry. It's 11 o'clock and I don't know whether to eat breakfast or lunch. I think I'm hungry. I hate watching Blu-rays on this TV. It looks too real. I'm not even hungry.
My phone is 4G, but we don't have 4G coverage where we live, so it's the worst. This is the worst.
No! Oh! I clicked restart instead of shut down. I have to wait for it to start back up again so I can shut it down.
I hate it. I'm like too healthy. I never get to use any of my sick days.
Closet full of clothes, nothing to wear.
My white noise machine broke last night and I didn't get any sleep.
There's nothing to watch. There is nothing to watch.
The bottom of my foot has been itching all day, but it tickles when I scratch it.
I didn't finish brushing my teeth this morning. My battery died halfway through. I hate that.
My hair smells like Starbucks.
My hand smells like Starbucks.
My iPad smells like Starbucks.
That's the worst. I lost it.
Just shoot me.
Just shoot me.
Put me out of my misery. Kill me now.
Just shoot me in the face. Wasn't I just chewing gum? I don't remember spitting it out.
This blanket doesn't have any sleeves.
Good morning, Allentown Victory Church. Welcome back. And today we are starting a new series. And if you know me, you know that I like puns. And so this is kind of a play on words, not exactly pun, but it is. It's a play on words. So the title of this sermon series is called Unfairwell. All right, Unfairwell. So you're having two different words here kind of put together. You have the word farewell, right? And that's something when we're saying goodbye to somebody, we say farewell, farewell, right? And then not too many people really say that nowadays, but nonetheless, we know what farewell means. And then we have the other word there, unfair. And this is something that oftentimes we use quite a bit when we're complaining or things are not going right or the way we think things should go. We say, this is very unfair. Or, I cannot believe this happened. Or if you were a kid, kids always say, oh, this is unfair. This is not fair. Why do they get to do this and I don't? But the truth is, as adults, we all kind of do that as well. This is unfair. Why do they get to do this? Why do they get this promotion? Why don't I get this? You know, they did this wrong. How is it that they don't get penalized for this? And all this other kind of nonsense that happens with it. But here's the truth. History is filled with unfair things. And it's time that we get that word unfair out of our vocabulary. Just kind of how like farewell is out of our vocabulary, we need to get the word unfair as well. So we want to say farewell to unfair. That's why we're calling this Unfairwell. All right? And so we also want to do unfair, and we want to do it well. When we go through unfair situations, we want to do it with, we want to be the creme of the creme, so to speak. We want to rise to the top. Out of all the world, out of all the people that are going through unfair situations, Christians should know how to go through it better than anybody else. And so this is, again, the series that we're getting into, Unfairwell. And I want to encourage you that if you're dealing with unfair situations, or you've dealt with it, or you're helping someone else go through it, that perhaps this could be something that becomes part of your vocabulary, where we're taking something out and we're learning how to replace it. And so sometimes, you know, in my mind, I have to put stop signs, you know, so to speak, where, all right, I do not want to say this. This is a word I don't want to say anymore, so I have to like figure out ways to have my brain halt right before I want to say something. And my hope is that this will happen with the word unfair. That even when the feeling comes up, there will be a trigger inside of us that says, no, I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to go to this word. I'm not going to go to this feeling because this is not, even though it might seem legitimate, this is not necessarily the truth of my situation. This is not necessarily, I'm not going to legitimize this feeling just because it looks like this at this present time. Now, I asked you in the beginning, about obvious things, and there's a funny commercial with Captain Obvious. I love those commercials. I think they're hilarious. But nonetheless, maybe you have a Captain Obvious around you, or I think all of us really have a Captain Obvious inside of us. Now, when I was 17 years old, I got to go to South Africa for 2 months, and that was an awesome mission trip. It was a youth mission trip, but I absolutely loved that trip. That was my very first real international mission trip. And on that trip, I've discovered a few things that this organization did, and they did it really well. And these guys have been going out for years, for decades. And one thing they did is that they told all the teenagers and everybody, even all the leaders, they said one thing we're not going to do is that we're not going to state the obvious. Let me say it again. We're not going to state the obvious, all right? The whole reason there's a commercial with Captain Obvious is because there's so many of us that like to say that. For example, right now we're coming into summertime. Do you have to say it's hot outside? Do you have to say, oh man, I'm sweating cats and dogs, or whatever, or if it's pouring cats and dogs, or oh my gosh, it's so cold and winter. Do you understand? Like, these things really serve no good whatsoever. They don't help anyone or any of the hearers. Now you might think, oh, I'm trying to fill in the gaps and just start, an icebreaker. Well, I want to encourage you to think of some other icebreakers, all right? You've probably used those icebreakers enough, and it's time to develop some new ones there. But again, we're oftentimes stating obvious things, or how about, this is a tricky one. How about when someone comes in your midst and they smell really, really bad, okay? Like really, really bad, and it's obvious, all right? Do you have to state it? Well, sometimes if you're most likely a nice person, you don't want to say anything, and if you're one of those just say whatever comes to your mind, you're making faces, you're doing everything, you're running away, and then afterwards, when that smell is gone, what is it that we say afterwards? Are we saying the obvious things, or are we figuring out other ways to be able to bless and to love others? All right, so here's the thing. There are things that are obvious to so many of us all the time, right? Now, if there are things that are obvious that you can fix, then I want to encourage you, that's something to talk about. There is a solution to the obvious situations. Then it's okay to state it and then move to the solution to those situations. However, what I want to do here in this series, though, as I mentioned, is we're dealing with the unfair things. And sometimes there are unfair things that are obvious. There are other things that are not. And that's sometimes why we scream, this is unfair. Because it doesn't seem, something that seems like it should be obvious to everybody, but it's not obvious. All right? And so, we all come into situations like that. In fact, I'll give an example right now. And this is a little bit of a thing on me. But I got into a little bit of a car accident yesterday and had a truck hit my vehicle. And that was not fun. And to me, it was obvious that it was the other person's fault and not my own. All right? It was obvious. However, it was not necessarily obvious to the police officer. And that really irked me. All right? That really irked me that he did not seem to understand the situation that took place right there, even though the hit was in the back of my vehicle and everything. Nonetheless, though, I want to scream, hey, this is not fair. You didn't see this back here. You had us move over here, and you didn't, whatever, all this other kind of scenarios. The thing is, though, that feeling of unfair comes up in all of our life, and we deal with that. And as I left the scene of what took place there, I just thought, I got to let this go. Just let it go, let it roll. I was kind, I was considerate to everybody I was talking to, okay? However, I wanted to tense up, like, this is not right. This is really wrong. But then I had to learn, you know what? I wasn't even thinking of this message that I'm speaking right now. I had to realize this, I just got to let this roll off. I got to let this roll off and keep going. Life is bigger than this. Que sera, sera, right? Now, if we look through the Bible, we see a bunch of unfair situations. In our last series, we talked about a number of things called permission to fail, right? That was our last series, and how there were failures of people, things that they did that messed up or appeared like failures. Now, this has some similar tones to it because we're talking about unfair situations. Things that were unfair that perhaps the people that were in that situation might have felt like a failure, or perhaps they didn't. In these particular situations, we're not actually having anyone state that they felt like a failure, this is why this is on a different series and different category here, Unfairwell. But we are going to be talking about Bible characters. Now, I mentioned in the last series we're going to talk about this one guy named Joseph, right? And so we're going to talk about Joseph here in just a minute. Now, I'm not going to read the story of Joseph because it's quite extensive. However, there are a lot of unfair things that happened to Joseph. Now, this was Jacob's favorite son, right? Or Israel. Jacob became Israel. Now, how about just that right there? Was that fair to the other 11 brothers that there was a favorite son out of all the different sons? No, that was already coming from an unfair situation. But then the brothers getting upset, what did they do? They threw him into a pit. Was that fair? No, that wasn't fair to him at all. That was quite unfair. Not only did they throw him in a pit, then they were contemplating about killing him, right? And then God saved him, so he didn't die. And the one brother saved him, and they sold him into slavery. Was that fair? Absolutely not. That is completely unfair. Having your family sell you into slavery, can you get more unfair than that? I don't think so. So out of all the people that have a right to scream unfair, Joseph, I think, is one of the key people that could raise his hand and say, yeah, I had a little bit of an unfair life. I had some unfair situations. I had some disadvantages to moving forward into the dreams and callings and purposes that I have. And oftentimes when we're screaming unfair, it's because, man, this is a disadvantage. All of a sudden we're moving forward and a disadvantage came into place. However, can I tell you that God is not fair either? We'll get to that in a little bit, all right? Now, here comes Joseph, I'm about to say Daniel, Joseph into slavery, right? And now he gets sold to Potiphar, and he's working there, and now all of a sudden Potiphar's wife gives an accusation against him, saying that this man all of a sudden tried to do something very incorrect to the wife, okay? Trying to keep it PG-13 right now, right? Tried to do something very incorrect, and so all of a sudden the woman screamed, and it wasn't true. And now Joseph all of a sudden now gets thrown in jail because Potiphar has to believe his wife, and he gets thrown in jail. Was that fair when Joseph did nothing wrong? In fact, he did what was right, and then he got penalized for it. Is that fair at all? Not at all. Okay? Now, if he had sinned and got in trouble, that's one thing. That seems fair. That seems just. See, another word for fair even is justice. And when we even talk about justice, we think about our justice system, and we think about really how unjust a lot of the things in the justice system are, and I understand that. However, we got to look that God is a just God, and He's different than what our justice system is. All right? He's different than some of the situations we've dealt with. However, the things that He does or allows will still seem very unfair to us because our sight is very limited. So let's keep going. We have him thrown into jail, not for a situation. Now, after a few years, we have someone from Pharaoh's courts, two people from Pharaoh's courts, a butler and the wine bearer, all right, or the baker and the wine bearer. Right now I'm forgetting with the butler or the baker, so I apologize for that. I'm pretty sure it's actually the baker here. So the baker and the wine bearer. And they're coming down, and they both had dreams, but they were also both in trouble here. They were both accused, all right, of doing something against Pharaoh. And so they come down and they have dreams while they are in jail. And Joseph comes and interprets the dreams, and he is dead on accurate. And he tells the guy that serves the wine to the Pharaoh, he says, hey, remember me when you get out of here. Remember me. And the guy says, surely I'll remember you. I will absolutely. And he gets out, and what does he do? He forgets Joseph. Was that fair? Absolutely not. Now, once again, he's forgotten in the midst of this situation. All right? But as I look through Joseph's life, I felt like God corrected me on something, because I am always usually looking at the difficulty he went through. In fact, when I'm talking to people in jail, I love talking about Joseph, how Joseph was in jail. And then he went to the second in command, because eventually Pharaoh did have a dream and need interpretation. And the wine taster, the guy that brought the wine, all of a sudden went and got the cupbearer, went and got Joseph out of jail and told the Pharaoh, hey, this is the guy that can interpret your dreams. He did it and then became second in command. And so with that said, God corrected me and told me that this story is a story of God's favor. All right? It's not a story about how unfair and how difficult Joseph had it. It's a story of God's favor on this man. And when I started looking through the lens of God's favor, well, first of all, let me say this. God's favor is not fair, is it? It says it's unmerited favor. And so there is merited favor that God will give you. And that's actually more in the terms of stewardship, right? Stewardship has forms of God's favor. Now that's a whole kind of different little topic, and it might be something interesting to talk about if your leader wants to talk about that. But there is earned favor. Okay, so let me clarify that, because some people say that there is only unmerited favor, God's favor, we can't earn it, yada, yada, yada. There's a truth to that when we talk about unmerited favor or grace in some ways. However, there are graces that still come through merited favor, through stewardship, right? And so, what you sow, you reap. That is a very clear thing of stewardship, isn't it? And a very clear thing of reward, and even God's favor upon the reaping of what you're sowing, a principle that God put into place, okay? And so, again, we're now coming into here God's favor, though. And this was not necessarily favor that he earned, okay? Now, he did good. Joseph did good, but God put his extra upon Joseph's good. So, we even look, he had favor from Jacob, his father. God gave him favor in the midst of that. It might have been unfair to the brothers, but it was very favorable to Joseph. I've had times when God has favored me, and it's not favorable for other people, right? But God favors me in some scenarios, and I love it, particularly when it comes to travel. I love it how God favors me with that. I love talking about it. How God just gives favor in those situations that's, again, not fair. It's not fair. I don't deserve it. That's what I say by not fair. Just like we say with negative things that it's unfair. Neither do we necessarily deserve the things that God gives us, but yet we don't start crying glory, hallelujah for some of those things. Sometimes we don't even realize it. Sometimes we think we do deserve it, so we don't talk about it because we think we've earned it. And that's a dangerous place to be as well. And sometimes unfair situations might come from that. Why? Because pride comes before a fall. All right, so sometimes when we're falling, we're thinking, unfair, I was doing so good. Well, maybe there was pride right before that situation. Nonetheless, let's backtrack here to Joseph. So Joseph, he gets sold into slavery, right? Gets to Potiphar. And then he becomes literally over all of Potiphar's household in a short amount of time. God gave him favor in the midst of slavery. Then he gets thrown in jail, and he becomes literally the guy that's running the whole jail. All right, that's why he was able to go talk to the two guys that came from Pharaoh's court. God gave him favor in the midst of being in jail. And then he gets all of a sudden to Pharaoh, interprets a dream, and Pharaoh takes a guy from jail, makes him second in command. Once again, God's favor. What seems unfair to you? Could that be the very stepping stone of God's favor in your life? Could that be the very thing that God is using to take you to the places that God has for you? I want to remap what is considered unfair. And if we can get that language out of our hearts, so you don't see Joseph complaining. You don't hear about his complaints or his toils or his cries. But what we do hear about is God's favor upon his life. And then from that now, the dreams that he had when he was a kid that his brothers probably got jealous of, but the father Jacob kept in his heart. Now, when he was second in command and he saved, literally, now he was in the favor of all of Egypt and then also all of Israel, because he saved up 7 years and 7 years of plenty when there was tons of food and grain and wheat. He saved it, and then 7 years of famine, he helped sell it back to all the people. And he gained favor everywhere he went. Everyone loved Joseph at that moment in time, okay? And then Joseph's family came to him. Now Joseph then got married, had kids, and Joseph's first child he called Manasseh. And that word right there, Manasseh, the name of the meaning of that name means God has caused me to forget. What did God cause Joseph to forget? All the pain of the past, all the unfair situations that he dealt with. All the things that were difficult, God caused him to forget. I think of it like a woman that's pregnant and about to give birth, and there's so much pain that happens. Does not seem fair, but once the baby gets born, it's almost like some of those things get eclipsed, because now that which has been labored for has been birthed. Now that's something that's kind of earned, so to speak, right? But again, God's favor isn't earned. God blessed Joseph, but I also do believe that Joseph was a good steward of his time. He was a good steward of his lips. It doesn't show him stating the obvious in those situations, but it shows him still blessing God. It shows him still honoring God in the midst of every one of those situations, and that is something that is praiseworthy and honorable. And so, as we look at Joseph, and look at our own lives, I want to encourage us to say goodbye to unfair, to get that language out of our lips, off of our tongue, and so that we can, again, be able to go through unfair situations well. That is the goal and the topic of what we're moving into right now. And, when Joseph saw all his brothers, he didn't come to them with anger. He came to them with the realization this was God's plan. God sent me through all those situations to get me here before you now so that I could be providing for you and for your families and for all of our families. And so God gave him that child, Manasseh, and then gave him Ephraim. Ephraim meant plentiful, bountiful. So God gave him the ability to forget and the ability to move forward into fruitfulness. And God wants to give us that as well, where we can forget the unfair situations and move into plentifulness. But the plentifulness is not just for us, but it's for our brothers, our sisters, our family, our nation, those that are around us. God wants us to unfare well, so that way we can be a blessing to others that are going through unfair situations, so that we could be a source of provision and love and goodness and kindness and joy to those that are around us. So I want you to ask a few different questions here that are around you as well. Questions that the leaders to be asking right now. So here's one question. What are some obvious things that you think you mention too often? Okay? So here's the Captain Obvious question. What are some things that are too obvious that you think you mention too often? Number 2, what was something that was unfair that happened to you? And how did you or are you moving past it? Or how are you moving past it? Okay? So what's something unfair that happened to you and how are you moving past it, or what did you do to already move past it? Number 3, what new things have birthed through the pains of those unfair situations? What are some things that have been birthed? What are some new things that were birthed through some of those unfair situations? Number 4, can we picture and describe any other situations that we deemed unfair, but were actually a critical piece in the path of God's favor? Let me say it again, because I kind of messed it up saying it. All right. Can we picture and describe any other situations where we deemed it unfair, but it was actually a critical piece in the path of God's favor? All right. Chew on that one, think about that, and let's try to bring that out and cultivate that good and what God's doing in us and realization of God's favor on our life. And then I want to encourage you to be praying with one another. I want to encourage you to be giving online. If there's a basket, it should be coming out at this point in time right now. So I want to encourage your giving too. And God bless you. Have a wonderful week. We'll see you next week.